Disgruntled ANC members are set to file an urgent court application against the NEC list of candidates. They say the current leadership has not been forthcoming on how it compiled this list of those who will ultimately make it to the 80-member NEC. The presidential hopeful, Lindiwe Sisulu, has also claimed irregularities in a dispute of the nomination results of the party's top six. The party will hold its 55th National Elective Conference this weekend at Nasrec. Well, in studio with me now, I'm joined by ANC NEC member and the nominee of National Chairperson, Dr. David Masondo. He also doubles up as the Deputy Minister of Finance. This promises to be a nice and wide-ranging interview, Dr. Masondo. Thank you very much for making it to studio.
Thanks, Dolly, and good morning to your viewers.
Well, thank you. Thank you for making it here. Such a pleasure talking to you. So, let's start with the controversial stuff. 2 reports have now been finalized by the ANC's Integrity Commission, Phala Phala and Digital Vibes. However, reports suggest that a decision was made that they not be tabled at the NEC because tensions are too high. Was that a wise decision?
Well, the terms of reference require the Integrity Committee to give its report through the organizational report directly to the NEC. So that's the decision of the NEC, that the matters need to be tabled before the national conference taking place this week.
A dress rehearsal for those discussions around these 2 reports, and they also happen to affect the 2 people who are hoping to lead the party. While on the one hand, the one says, I still need to remain in power for me to get my second term. The other is a challenger, which is why I'm stuck on this word that has been used, at least in the reportage, and that is that tensions are too high, and therefore this report, or these 2 reports, simply could not be discussed at this NEC meeting. Why was that the decision? Was there fear that this is going to boil over?
Firstly, on Phala Phala, the Integrity Committee never tabled any report, and the decision was that it should be incorporated in the organizational report, which will be presented in the national conference. The only thing that was discussed was whether we should support the impeachment of the president through the establishment of an impeachment committee.
Yeah.
And the decision was that the ANC should vote against the motion that would lead to the establishment of an impeachment committee.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was that the president, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, has filed a review for that report with the Constitutional Court, as we are aware. And we're hoping that the Constitutional Court will also help to determine the threshold according to which a president has to be impeached. Because, slowly, you've got to be wary of a threshold that makes it easy for South Africa to impeach a president, because that set conditions for instability, and once the country is unstable, there's policy uncertainty. You have seen how the markets have reacted in that regard. The rand depreciated, and what that means is that our ability to pay for the imports, including oil, that we don't produce here in South Africa, our ability to buy oil and other imports into South Africa becomes more expensive, and that has implications for increasing the cost of production, increasing the cost of living.
Yeah.
We've also seen the yield, which is the money, interest payment that we pay as government for borrowing money.
Yeah.
So when there are those uncertainties, it creates a lot of challenges and problems, and markets repair. So we've got to be very careful, and this is not about the incumbent. It's about making sure that we set the necessary threshold to impeach a president, because, as I said, that generates a lot of instability in the country.
But that said, Dr. Masondo, and I take it on board, that the stability of the country is of utmost importance. However, upholding the rule of law is also sacrosanct. And therefore, the ANC reading a riot act to its members in Parliament to say, you will vote against the adoption of this Phala Phala report, does that set the right tone for a country that says the rule of law is what it is?
No one, and I mean it, no one is above the law. All of us, we've got to abide by the law, because, as you correctly say, that set good conditions for certainty, for predictability. But the issue here, it's about the interpretation of the law itself, and that is why we've got a constitutional court that should say, going forward, this is the standard according to which you've got to impeach a president. So these things are new. I mean, we're a relatively new democracy, and every day we're building the law. So what we are doing is not inconsistent with the law. We're not breaking the law. We're simply saying, courts, please help us to interpret the law so that in future we'll base our decisions as Parliament on the basis of the law.
Yeah. Well, that said, I don't need to educate you about the three pillars of the state: the executive, Parliament, and the judiciary. Parliament is a separate entity, or is an independent institution of its own among these three pillars. And the people who are there, by the way, are the representatives of the general South African populace. And where does the ANC get this idea that if you are in Parliament, you owe your seat in that National Assembly to the party that deployed you there, as opposed to the people who voted that party into Parliament?
No, we represent the people, but we get there through political parties, and we therefore have a responsibility as public representatives to caucus. It's not unconstitutional, it's not illegal for us to be at one on the issues that are before Parliament. Every party, they do caucus. It's not only the African National Congress.
And so what you're saying, during the Zuma years, those that said they were going to vote with their conscience, and in fact went ahead and voted with their conscience, you're saying that those people should have been disciplined?
Look, the important thing is that we have to first discuss and win each other as public representatives, as the members of the African National Congress in Parliament, to find each other on the issues that are before Parliament. And that's what we've been doing. That, guys, let's find each other on the issues that are before Parliament. And that's what we're basically doing.
We're going to talk in a moment about your chances of being chairperson of the ANC. As I mentioned earlier, you made it, or you made the cut among the top three whose threshold allowed for you to be among that top 3. But what exactly would you want to achieve if you were to be elected into that position? But we'll discuss that in a moment. We continue the conversation in a bit. We continue our discussion with ANC NEC member and nominee for the position of National Chairperson, Dr. David Masondo. But Masondo, thank you for staying with us. I know you're desperate to move from this Integrity Commission discussion, but I've still got to pedal on that issue. How seriously does the NEC of the ANC take the reports and recommendations of the Integrity Commission?
We do, and I think the fact that the ANC NEC also put the rule according to which a member has to step aside, demonstrate the seriousness that the ANC takes the matters of integrity as part and parcel of renewal, as part and parcel of rebuilding itself to serve the people of South Africa better.
I'm asking you this question because already there are suggestions that the president is probably at fault, that the Integrity Commission may have ruled in much the same way as the Section 89 Phala report produced by Parliament. And I'm saying this, or this question is sticky, because if the Integrity Commission, which operates within the political party structure, says the integrity of the party is at stake here and we've got to protect it, why is it easy for it to be shoved aside, its reports and its recommendations? It's almost as if it's a naughty child. No, don't come here and tell us, things that we ought to overlook. Why is that the reason?
So, Xoli, there's no report tabled by the Integrity Commission with regard to the matter involving the president. So there's no report in that regard. And with regard to other reports, the Integrity Commission has made its recommendations, and the NEC has considered those on the basis of their merit.
I then ask you regarding your matter with the Integrity Commission, where did that end? Because the recommendation, was it not, that you step aside from heading the political school of the ANC, given the matters that arose at the time?
The Integrity Commission has recommending powers, and the recommendations, based on their merit, they were not accepted.
You almost remind me of the former president, Jacob Zuma, against the public protector, that recommendations are just recommendations. They are not binding. That's what you're effectively saying about the Integrity Commission, are you not?
That's what the ANC conference resolved, that the Integrity Commission will have recommending powers. With regard to the matter that you are raising on the public protector, the Constitutional Court had to determine whether the recommendations of a public protector were binding or not. And the Constitutional Court ruled, and we're clear now, that the recommendations of the public protector are binding. There's a huge difference there.
There's a huge difference, and I take your point that on Phala, the report may have been finalized, but there's nothing tabled before the NEC. That's why it's going to be discussed at conference. But I guess the logic of my question was that if indeed it does confirm that the Integrity Commission is worried about the image of the party and therefore the president ought to step aside, I'm putting it to you using your example that it's simply going to be shoved aside because a recommendation is a recommendation.
No, let's not preempt what the NEC is going to say. We don't have a report before us, and we can't predict and act like sangomas to seek to know what the NEC is going to say. Let's allow the report to be tabled and give space to the NEC to discuss whatever recommendation the Integrity Commission is going to place before the NEC.
Let's then talk about your chances of being chairperson of the African National Congress. You're among those that have been propagating this idea of young people now marshalling which way or which direction the party should go. Interestingly, last week, if not the week before that, I was talking to the current chairman of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, whom you are contesting, and he says, at 67, yes, I've got lots to offer. What is it that you have to offer?
I mean, firstly, I take the position of the chairperson of the African National Congress very, very seriously. Historically, the first chairperson of the ANC, they used to call them a speaker, Thomas Mapikela, born in 1869, died in 1945. He was the first chairperson of the ANC. Yes, they used to call them speakers. So he acted, his role, or the role of the chairperson, is essentially, it's not just to chair meetings in the African National Congress. You're also a custodian of the ANC policies, and you've got to ensure that ANC policies are implemented. So sitting there as a chair, you've got to be clear what the policies of the African National Congress are, and hold the executive accountable, the ANC in its entirety, to make sure that those policies are implemented. And there's a historical logic behind that.
Before you get into the historical logic, you've just explained the role of the chairperson of the ANC. Is that why Gwede Mantashe will act with almost as an executioner to say, if you vote for the adoption of this report, Phala report in Parliament, you will feel the impact? Is that
no,
what gives
so the ANC is a democratic organization, right? So whatever decision we take is preceded by democratic debates and discussions. And once you've agreed, you implement. And this concept of democratic centralism is applied in choirs. People who sing, who practice, they agree that you're gonna sing the baraton. And once they've agreed on that, when they go on stage, they've democratically agreed that you are going to sing this tone, you are going to sing a soprano. And once they're on stage, they are duty-bound to implement the decisions that have been democratically arrived at. It's not an ANC thing. It happens in all organizations, including opposition parties. There's no organization that discusses and not come to an agreement and not seek to implement the decision that it takes. So the responsibility of the chair, therefore, firstly, you've got to say what have the highest decision-making bodies of the African National Congress resolved. One of the important bodies is the National Conference. So your starting point is the policies of the African National Congress, and you make sure you marshal everyone to make sure that they implement the policies and the decisions of a structure. And in between, the highest decision-making body is the NEC.
You are, as I mentioned earlier, you're competing with Gwede Mantashe. He is the incumbent, and those people generally will weigh heavily, I guess, on whoever the delegates are then presented with as an alternative. Stan Matabata has the weight of a province, perhaps, or the backing of a province, if I could use that term, and wherever else he is nominated. I'm simply saying that these two people, they seem to have power bases. Where do you fit in? Where do you think your support comes in? And how confident are you that you will get this vote come next week? Well, come this weekend?
The fact that one is on the ballot demonstrates that the members of the ANC, the branches of the African National Congress, they are the final arbiters. They finally decide who gets elected, and conversations are ongoing on different candidates, including my candidature, on why I'm one of the persons who should be elected for the position of the chair. And I think we've got to understand this in the context of what we, my generation, seek to offer to the ANC in order to make the ANC an organization that serves South Africa better. Our view, and if I have to be frank, is that the generation that has been dominant in the last 30 years, and I would say is the third generation of the African National Congress. The first generation, you could say, those are the founders of the African National Congress, Dube, Seme, and the second generation is a generation that get born in the after 1910, after the formation of the African National Congress, and the Mandelas of this world, Sisulu, and many others, and they get active.
Yes.
In the 40s, they make their own impact, and the generation, the third generation, is a generation that largely get active in the 60s, 80s. And this is a generation that has been dominant in the African National Congress for the last 30 years. They've made huge mistakes. They've made huge achievements. I mean, if I have to mention, I have a catalogue of different policy mistakes and mishaps that this generation has basically made. And I think our generation has a responsibility to really offer some carefully thought policy interventions. I mean, we've got unemployment of 44%, and this has happened under the dominance of the generation that has been in leadership positions for the last 30 years.
And yours is quite a special role, because as I mentioned earlier, you head up the political school of the ANC. I don't need to tell you what former presidents of this party are saying about the quality of a cadre that is coming through the ranks nowadays. In fact, they're arguing that instead of having quantities of people, there are parties that want to get to 1 million members. But he's saying, let that not be the target, that the ANC has X amount of members, but it's the quality that matters. Where is that quality, Mr. Masondo?
Exactly, Xoli. It is this generation that has been dominant for the last 30 years. They failed to produce a politically educated membership and leadership of the ANC.
When you say are you excluding yourself?
They've been dominant. I'm not excluding myself.
Okay.
In the context,
say we.
No. In the context, there's power relations here.
Yeah.
There's dominance, and so it's in that context. I'm not saying we've not been part of it, and it's for this reason that we think that we should be at the center of driving the African National Congress. We've got to change the power relations so that we've got imported levers to make this African National Congress an effective organ to fight for the continuation of the liberation of our people. Because the political education, I mean, the school was established just 3 years ago. We've done our best in putting the curriculum. We've done our best in rolling out mass political education throughout the country. We've done our best to politically educate or remind some of the people in parliament, in legislature. So we think that as this generation, given an opportunity, we can do more if we're given more responsibilities which have more powers for us to make certain changes. I mean,
Can I quickly step in and say to you, 3 years is probably a long time. I'm going to juxtapose what you have just said, because that to me is an excuse. You've been in existence for 3 years. You're not telling me anything that talks about filtering the quality from the quantity. So I'll tell you which structure is already doing that. And I think they only have just come into existence. The Electoral Committee of the ANC, headed by former President Motlanthe, I think they are doing exactly what should have been your role. They're saying, you have a conviction that is more than 6 months, I think it's a year, you can't possibly be in the NEC. You have a pending case against you, you can't. We're sorry. No matter the amount of nominations you have, I'm saying that is a definition,
I think
that is an example
you're confusing
of
two things.
Being effective.
No. You know, education, for someone to be solid, 12 years, for someone to be politically educated, even by our mainstream education standard, take a child, take you 12 years to go through proper schooling in order for you to be a solid person. It's not a matter of just 3 years, and then thereafter you are solid, you're politically understand what we stand for as the African National Congress. This thing, it's not something that you can just, you're not doing popcorns, you know, just putting there and then thereafter you're ready-made, here are the cadres, here are the members, ready to run. It's a very tedious process, and we operated under very difficult conditions of COVID. And let me also say, political education is not a panacea for all the problems that we have in the African National Congress. In fact, many of the problems that we have are generated by people who are highly politically educated.
I've got to move the conversation to your role as Deputy Minister of Finance. How big a problem or how big a risk is Eskom on South Africa's financial stability, economic stability, let me put it?
Well, Eskom presents a very systemic risk to the economy. It doesn't work. Households can't have electricity, they can't function. Businesses can't function. And we've seen how Eskom's inability to provide electricity has contributed to poor economic performance in this country. And government has undertaken different reforms to make sure that we solve the energy problem in South Africa. Amongst other things that government has done, is said, look, let's allow private business people, private individuals to generate electricity. And that was done by changing the Electricity Act, which in the past only allowed people to generate electricity up until 1 megawatt. Now you can generate up until 100 megawatts, and these different investments going in the country in which people are seeking to generate electricity. And I think the liability solution, that the debt problem is being attended to. I mean, the minister announced in the last policy budget statement that we'll be in February announcing the things that we need to do. But Eskom is also a reflection of a generational failure, of a generation that has been dominant in the last 8 years in this country. Because the Eskom problem doesn't start 5 years ago. If you recall, when the economy was growing and Eskom could not cope, could not supply sufficient energy to grow the economy.
Yeah.
The decision was that, look, in the early 2000s, that, look, let's go and build a Medupi. It was a reactive policy stance. And Medupi was built, and even that, the execution of building Medupi was badly done. We had cost overruns, and today we're sitting with a debt of 400 billion that we've got to deal with. And we've not finally solved the energy problem, but there are interesting steps, important steps towards solving the energy crisis.
And you occupy a special office that could deal with the debt situation at Eskom, and I want to press you on that. 400 billion. By when do you think this could be paid off, and how?
So the liability solution, the debt problem, the minister said, will come back on the details on how we deal with the debt, because the Eskom has different debt instruments, and you definitely have to deal with them differently. They are not the same. You've got to engage lenders. You've got to get some experience on how difficult it is to deal with the lenders. I mean, Land Bank, in our attempt to find a liability solution there, it was not an easy thing. Can you imagine Eskom with the 400 debt, with different lenders? It's not an easy thing, and therefore it was correct for the minister to say, South Africa, please do allow us to come back to you in February 2023 with different solutions on the debt problem.
And so we're going to borrow our way out of the debt situation at Eskom. Is that what I'm effectively hearing from you?
No, I think it's a question of, part of the debt, we're going to take some of it, a large part of it, on the sovereign, so that Eskom is able to raise money to deal with its own problem, the operational issues that it is facing. So we're going to take part of the debt, but as to how much, what is the quantum of that debt, it's something that we are still discussing within government.
Mr. Masondo, I don't want to belabor the point, but we are almost at breaking point. The energy minister, Gwede Mantashe, saying the way things are going, it would seem that there are those whose intentions it is to collapse the state through the mismanagement of Eskom or through the load shedding situation. Is there any immediate solution? And I'm asking you this because you sat in these NEC meetings where we are reading reports that it was quite a topical discussion where people were told, Minister of Energy, Minister of Public Enterprises, to say, people, what is going on? So how seriously does the ANC take this?
Well, we do take it very seriously. And I think my view is that I think we've spent so much time trying to solve the Eskom problem and less time in dealing with the energy problem facing South Africa. And I think one of the things that we need to consider as South Africa is to make sure that each household does have a solar roof system so that we don't think about energy only insofar as Eskom is concerned. Yes,
is
Eskom
that a
does
proposal? Because what you have just said now is probably the most logical thing I could have heard in a long time.
Conference. So we're not just discussing leadership and all that, but we're also saying in order to solve this problem, it's important for us to think differently about the energy problem as opposed to focusing only on Eskom. I'm not saying that we should not solve the Eskom problem. We should. It's an important SOE that we need to get it right. But I do think that one of the campaigns that we need to undertake as South Africans, all of us, let's have a campaign that says one household, one solar panel system for us to generate electricity, but also subsidize different businesses that are doing, undertaking different energy alternatives, small businesses and all that. Because I think we're so fixated with Eskom, important as it is, but I do think that we need to think outside the box.
You see, I work in the business of news. That's a soundbite that we most probably are going to run with. Let's then conclude the conversation very briefly, less than a minute. The role or mandate of the Reserve Bank, to nationalize or not to nationalize, very briefly.
I think the critical thing is to make sure, and it is a policy decision of the ANC taken in 2007, that one of the things that the Reserve Bank must look at is make sure that you target employment. And the reason for that, I mean, historically, in the economics debate, you've always had the issue about how do you, the trade-off between economic growth and inflation. Because as the economy grows, you are definitely going to have inflation. And you've got to balance the two. And the reason why you'll have, employment is associated with economic growth. As the economy grows, more people get employed, they've got money, they demand goods and services. And the question is, how do you make sure that you balance the inflation targeting, but also economic growth, and at the core of it is targeting employment?
You haven't answered my question, to nationalize or not to nationalize. But I guess we're going to have to leave it there, because you're going to tell me that that's a discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. Am I right? Yes.
Yeah, I think for me the critical thing is to targeting employment.
All right. David Masondo, Dr. David Masondo. He is the ANC NEC member and a nominee for the position of chairperson. Hopefully you took something out of that discussion.